So one of the critical things, and certainly it becoming one of the more relevant security applications in more recent times, is it's more important than ever, and there's several critical changes in the corporate environment that are leading to that. One of the most obvious is the digitization of information in all forms. We see this in the healthcare industry with electronic medical records. We see it in the credit card industry with the transportation of that data. We see it in our offices with customer files and Salesforce integration and all the different pieces of data that now relate to our customers, to their personal identification information, whether it happens to be medical, financial, Social Security. All this information that at one time or another was transported in an analog fashion or stored in databases that weren't necessarily accessible are excessively accessible today. And the challenge is that while the benefit is obviously that it's speeded up much of our business environment, it has also created a very large challenge in the sense that this is a lot of information that we don't want to get out of our platforms and our networks. And just as importantly, we see that every day in the news about whether it happens to be a breach or a lost laptop or a file on the back of a storage facility truck. These are all elements we'll touch on, but it's very relevant today. The second is information laws, disclosure laws, and regulations. The state of California regulations about disclosure of personal identification information has obviously been the impetus for a great deal of the focus and support that the industry has created around DLP and creating awareness for this. But certainly high-tech element of the healthcare industry has its own rules and regulations. Many states have their own rules and regulations now, and it's just become a de facto that companies have to make announcements when information has been leaked from their organization that regards customers' information. We've seen that with Sony recently, Citibank recently, NHS, you name it. The examples are all over the place, and it's extremely important that these rules are in place because they are protecting customers, but they put a burden on all companies. And certainly a big piece of why DLP is a large focus today is that rationale. The third reason is the dramatic increase in portable computing solutions. So we see this today even more so than the first two. The first two, we could argue, seem a little bit passé in the fact that we've been going through that experience for the last several years. But the portable computing era is now upon us. You know, it started with laptops, fine. It might seem like everybody's had laptops for a while, but laptops have become almost the de facto computer equipment in offices when people are buying new office equipment today. They are no longer desktops. Secondly, smartphones and the impetus of the fact that these phones today are really mini computers, and they have full access to our information quite frequently, whether it's through an application on a cloud-based program like Salesforce or just getting direct access to our own corporate network so that our Salesforce or our field operations groups can get access to that information. It's created a liability for us as well. And lastly, tablets, certainly a big piece of that. The recent introduction of the iPad and its competitors is broadening that definition of what is a computer and, more importantly, what does it have access to. And lastly, how do you define your network? Because most of these things are off-network now. And they're no longer within our perimeter, and it creates a whole new obligation from a data loss prevention perspective. So three of the core reasons. And from that, what you see are the critical adoption reasons for DLP. And, you know, as much as that we'd always like to say that it's to comply with disclosure laws and regulate, you know, it's for the good of the country and the good of their customers, really, in any business, you need a rationale to adapt new costs to your business or to incur new costs. And the first is making sure that you're complying with disclosure laws. You certainly don't want to be found liable in a court of law. You don't want to be stuck in a TJ Maxx situation where you're forced to do things because you weren't complying with disclosure laws. So check. That's one of the critical reasons. Two is to monitor potential malicious insiders who threaten proprietary data or customer data. So there's enough stories of individuals who are able to take information off of our networks and either sell it or provide it out to malicious third parties for whether it's credit card usage, a disgruntled salesperson, you know, and anything in excuse me, in this category could be considered. If you're a small company and you have a customer list That's a perfect example of a malicious insider potentially taking proprietary data. If you are a large organization with a bunch of credit card information and somebody takes it and tries to sell that information on the marketplace, another example of malicious insiders accessing customer data. Obviously a big fear and certainly a high potential demand for a company's brand and reputation in the marketplace. The last reason, and I say this is the third purpose, and I've numbered these specifically, is safeguarding against careless employee actions, actually, that should read, who might disclose critical customer or corporate information. This is actually probably the #1 thing that actually occurs as it relates to disclosure or information loss or data leakage. In truth, you could almost invert this sequence. What I show here as number 3 is really probably the most prevalent way that information is leaked from an organization. It's very easy for somebody to attach the wrong Excel file to an email and send that out through the organization. It's very easy for them to include a social security number when they're sending out an email. It is very easy for them to access, maybe it's a social network of some kind, and accidentally load malicious code and somehow takes advantage of their computer and takes information off of it. These are things that happen more frequently than the first two. And the challenge is these people aren't doing it maliciously. There frequently isn't any intent. It's either through lack of training, lack of insight, or lack of proper protection from a corporate perspective. They're all valid reasons, and they're all reasons that everybody should employ DLP solutions in their environment today as soon as possible. So what that leaves us with, there's some critical areas of DLP focus, and in a moment I'll take you through what are some of the gap areas, but these are some of the critical areas of focus. Obviously, corporate email. Unencrypted personal identification information and attachments are huge threats that can just easily be accidentally released to the network or intentionally released out from your network and sent away to somebody else. Web applications, as I mentioned, social networking sites, webmail, online storage, all of these cloud-based applications that are applying online today are large threats from a DLP perspective. You can imagine an employee wanting to have access to a file from home, decides to drop it on Dropbox, and so that they can access it later that day or later that night when they get home to their home computer. Before you know it, some data in your organization not only exists on a cloud-based server where you don't even know where it is, they've now downloaded it to their personal computer at home so they could do some work, all trying to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, you actually had data leakage, and you can't control that personal device that sits in that employee's household. You might not even know it's there. Obviously, mobility devices, as we've already mentioned, laptops, smartphones, basically the whole category of remote users is a critical focus for DLP, and we have to talk about today in further detail. And then storage, most data, you can look at it from a server basis, but in reality, most of that data is inevitably stored on employees' computers or exists in some form of a duplicate file on an employee's computer. So while we think of storage in the first response as typically server concepts or some kind of shared computer that has access to some data, in a reality situation, we're really looking at the fact that almost every computer in a company's organization, an employee has data that should not be on that computer, number one, but probably exists in a duplicate nature, and we're not even aware that this information is sitting there, potentially if that computer is not destroyed properly, and that information goes out to a third party by accident when the computer is sold, or whether or not that one individual laptop or computer has a virus on it that allows access to that information. It creates a large challenge from a DLP perspective. The other challenge is that DLP is often defined on a very, very broad term. It can complicate when you want to compare DLP solutions because certainly not everybody has the exact same definition for DLP. It's not as simple to define today as might be a firewall or an intrusion prevention system or solution. So DLP itself is become a bit of a broad term to define a specific security service, and so that creates definitely a challenge when you're comparing providers, because somebody might have the best X but not offer a Y, and somebody offers a suitable X and a Y. So you have some challenges there, not only in which one's the best, but also at the same time which one you would prefer to avoid having multiple vendors, which might happen to cause you to go to the least common denominator at times. But really the challenge with that is we shouldn't be using each DLP provider to compare against each other. At first we should be taking a look at, evaluate based on a common approach to see how well they secure and manage your data leakage threat. So if you look at it, not necessarily comparing apples to potentially oranges, you should really look at the broad category and see how they fit into the needs of your organization and the definition of DLP and how you can secure your network, which I'll take you through right now. And then obviously if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the box to the right to ask any questions, and we'll provide you some context along the way if we can help, as well as if you're having any audio issues. So from a standard data loss prevention perspective, we'll go very simple. The core definition is prevent, and there's plenty of platforms that offer the concept of prevent. But at the end of the day, that is really only a relatively small piece of the pie, because you can try to prevent, but you don't necessarily know everything that you're preventing. If you don't know something is happening and you haven't built that into your prevention network, it could be happening all the time, and nothing has a complete picture as you'd like. So are your policies perfect? Odds are 99% of the time, no. I'm sure you're all extremely intelligent people. You're all very capable, and you're all trying to make sure that your networks are secure from a data loss perspective. But at the end of the day, nobody can be expected to be perfect. It's a question of the tools that you use and how you can use them. So if not, how would you know? Frequently, you don't have any idea. If somebody's found some end around on your network and is able to take some information off your platform, the only way you know is when it comes back to you, not necessarily in the action itself. So besides just the prevention, which is critical, obviously, for the most obvious of things, the next is to record. Really, and think of recording as not only do you know where you're sensitive, recording is making sure that you're capturing all the actions so that you can actually see what occurs. If I prevent 80% of the data loss opportunities on my network, but the other 20% are being exploited, if I'm able to record that other 20%, realize it, and understand that what actions users are taking on the network, I can then expand my prevention network. So in a sense, the recording allows me to, in hindsight, find and expand the definition of prevent, which is a critical element, because if you need to do some forensics on files being taken from your network, that's going to be the most critical thing you need to do. The next thing, as I said, is finding out where your sensitive data is. So discovering, making sure that you have an understanding of where the data sits on your network. And as I made sure to note, I'm less concerned about your servers because at the end of the day, you know what's on those servers. Those are probably the most locked down things in your network. What I'm more concerned about are your desktops and your laptops and your smartphones and any device that has that kind of portability or is off the core element of what I would say the server elements of your network. That's really where most of the data resides in one form or another, and that's probably more than likely where that data is going to find a way out of the organization. Now, I'm certain if you take a look at some of the things that have occurred recently in the news where hackers have broken into a network, keep in mind that hacking is typically done through other security services that are more from the outside going in. We're really talking about data loss prevention, which is more frequently focused on the inside information not getting out. So a lot of that happens from employee misuse and other elements, and that's where it's critical to find out on your network where your information lies. So the big question is, does your data loss prevention solution take an asset allocation of everything that's happening on the individual computers out there, besides just preventing, and in addition, able to record so that you can evaluate post and be able to expand your definition of prevention so that you're trying to lock down any and every access that is available. And then next you get to a whole different concept. Let's say now we've gotten to the point that we've prevented almost everything we can. We've recorded an incident that we don't know yet, but has caused some form of leak information. We can now discover where that information came from, but could you delete it? So in this world of remote users, can you find a way to get access to that information and make sure that you wipe it off the system? Encryption is a critical element of any security process, especially as it relates to PIN information. But the deletion of that data is also a critical element, so it can't be misused or hacked away at so that the encryption codes can be accessed and you can get yourself in more trouble.